In one country there lived a king who had a single son. As a father should, he surrounded the prince with care and attention and did everything so that his son would be happy. The prince, though handsome and strong, had a hard heart. He could easily hurt someone or make a rude joke at the expense of courtiers or servants. He would sometimes frighten the old footman from behind, and the man, clutching his chest, would barely recover. Or he would trip up the court cook carrying a dish with a pudding above his head, and the man, stumbling, would fall and send the pudding crashing to the floor. The king decided to hire the best tutors for the prince, hoping they would teach him good manners and kindness toward others. One day, during a lesson in court etiquette, an experienced teacher took the prince to the flower shop, hoping that the beauty of the flowers would soften the young man's heart. Besides, it would be useful for the prince to learn many interesting things about flowers. "Would your majesty care to dismount and greet the lady?" the teacher asked the prince when they arrived at the flower shop, whose owner was a friendly elderly florist. "Your horse will also get some rest, and we can step closer and ask the lady to show us her flowers and tell us something delightful about them." "No way," the prince replied rudely. "I can see and hear perfectly well from my horse. And what could there be to learn about these green brooms?" the prince said disdainfully of the flowers that, in colorful fragrant garments, were displayed in the shop. "Beauty should be everywhere, and outward beauty is useless if it is dark within," said the florist. "These flowers are not brooms, as your majesty put it, but my daughters. I raised them and tended them, and they will belong only to someone with a kind heart. The main thing is to be above everyone and bigger than everyone," the prince answered the florist. "Everything else is nonsense. Is that happiness? Is that the meaning of life, to be above everyone? There is so much beauty and wonder in the world at your very feet, and from such a height you might not notice it at all and ride past without ever learning what true happiness is. In any case, everyone chooses what his soul desires," the florist replied to the prince, but he would not listen. He spurred Mazurka, his horse, and galloped down the street, nearly knocking over passers-by. The next morning the prince woke as usual, but the room that had always seemed spacious now felt small. Everything around him, the table, the chairs, the chandeliers, the windows, the doors, was tiny, and the prince barely fit on his once enormous bed. He ran to the little mirror hanging on the wall and looked into it. To his horror, he saw a giant in the glass. Well, there was no cause for surprise. The prince had wished to be taller and greater than everyone, and it had come true. But now even the palace servants secretly laughed at him. Walking through the town on foot, because Mazurka, the largest horse in the kingdom, could no longer carry him and only trailed behind, young and old alike could mock the poor prince with cutting, hurtful words. Only when he withdrew alone into the palace garden did no one laugh at him. The flowers were always welcoming, turning their gentle, multicolored heads toward him. One day the giant decided for the first time in his life to go closer to the flowers. He knelt down and wondered how he had failed to notice such beauty earlier. What unearthly splendor these small, fragile, graceful beings possessed. There was something inexplicable about them, something he did not know, something that made his heart feel warm and light. He even forgot that he had become a giant and that the world had turned away from him. Nothing else troubled him, he seemed boundlessly happy. Unwittingly, the giant wished to touch the flowers. As soon as his huge fingers brushed their delicate petals, a wondrous fragrance spread through the garden. He had never felt such rapture in his life. It felt like magic, like a sacred ritual. The tender, almost translucent, seemingly unsubstantial petals shivered and trembled, and a melody began to sound in his heart that no musician in the world could compose. He remembered the florist's words, "There is so much beauty in the world." More and more often the prince came to the royal garden. He asked the palace gardener about the flowers, helped tend the beds, and soon learned the gardener's craft well enough to care for the flowers himself. His enormous stature and hands were no hindrance. Most importantly, he now loved the flowers. One day the prince bent to smell a flower and, to his surprise, saw a tiny creature within it, a tiny girl with translucent wings. The prince held his breath. The girl lay inside the flower, resting, and the giant gazed at her with astonished eyes. She woke, opened her eyes, and looked back at him. "Oh, who are you?" she cried. "But I think I already know about you. You are the prince who wished to be bigger and taller than everyone, and your wish came true. You became a giant." "Oh, forgive me," the little girl added, "I did not mean to offend you." The prince was not offended by the tiny girl, on the contrary, he was pleased to meet such a wondrous creature. He remembered how the ladies in waiting had once read him fairy tales, and fairies were mentioned in many of them. Feeling guilty, he said, "Forgive me, dear fairy, for disturbing you. What kind of prince am I? I am a wretched man, and a giant besides, as you said." "Don't be sad," said the little girl, rocking gently in the flower. "Everything can be fixed." "But how?" asked the prince. The little girl flew out of the flower and said, "I know what must be done. Come now, prince, get up. I will take you to the tale teller. He knows everything and will certainly help us." In a minute the giant was striding along the wide road toward the edge of town, guided by his tiny companion, who circled in the air above the prince's head and sometimes perched on his shoulder. They soon came to a small hut hung with many silver bells. The fairy fluttered by the hut, and the beating of her wings made even the largest bells ring with a lovely, crimson chime. She flew by once, twice, 3 times, and such a merry peal arose that the giant felt an involuntary joy in his heart. "Enough, enough," a kindly voice called, and a pleasant old man with a white beard appeared in the doorway. "Ah, you little rogue," the old man said. "Well, tell me what brings you here." "Hello, good tale teller," the fairy said, perching on his shoulder. "You have surely heard the story that happened to the prince of our kingdom?" "How could I not?" the old man answered. "All stories are written in my books." He went into the hut and brought out a large, beautiful book with silver bindings. "Well, tell us quickly what to do to help the prince," the little fairy asked eagerly. My, the old man replied kindly. "The prince must walk his own road. First, he must ask forgiveness from everyone he offended, both old and young, and from the florist. But she is not in the town now, she lives beyond that mountain in the flower valley," he said, pointing to the high mountains far from the kingdom. "All right, go. My tales are waiting." "The prince will be fine," the kind tale teller added. In the morning the prince approached each servant of the royal household, bowed deeply, and asked for forgiveness. He then entered the royal garden, watered the flowers, bade farewell to the little fairy, and set off. Mazurka, his faithful horse, followed. 3 days and 3 nights the prince traveled. He had to overcome many hardships along the way, walking over mountains toward the flower valley where the florist lived. More than once the giant had to squeeze through narrow gorges and clear away landslides, and once he even had to carry Mazurka on his back when she cut her hoof on sharp stones. At last the prince giant saw the flower valley spreading between rocky mountains, an extraordinary place filled with a wondrous fragrance. He easily found the house where the florist lived and hurriedly knocked at the gate. The florist seemed to have expected him. She opened the gate. "Forgive me," the prince said sincerely and with repentance to the elderly woman. "Oh, I am not angry with you at all," the florist replied. "One of my little friends has buzzed my ears full about you, prince, about how you no longer call flowers brooms and how you help the gardener. And I know why you came. You no longer want to be the tallest and greatest. But to restore your former stature one condition must be fulfilled: you must grow flowers. Prepare the soil, plant the seeds, water the seedlings in time. Most importantly, you must take these flowers to the shop and sell them. Do you agree?" "I am ready to begin work at once," the prince agreed. "But what about your size?" the florist smiled. "You are a giant and will trample all the beds. To prevent that you must become a dwarf. Do you agree?" she asked the giant. "I agree," the prince said firmly. "Then come in," the florist said, opening the gate wide. As the prince stepped forward, he immediately became a very small man. He was not embarrassed at all, he scarcely noticed the change. Only Mazurka now seemed too large for him, and to mount her he had to climb onto a fence or a tree. The next morning the prince set to work. He brought silt from the river and enriched the soil with it. He scattered seeds into the damp earth and waited for the sprouts to appear. While waiting he helped the florist with chores. When the first shoots came up he watered them with warm water brought from the lake. Mazurka helped him in all his labors. The prince hoed the beds, watered, hoed again, and soon beautiful flowers bloomed where the beds had been. The little man spent whole days in the flower valley. He could not tire of the beauty the flowers showed and could not get enough of their fragrance that filled the air. He felt as if in a marvelous fairy tale from which he did not wish to leave. Often he fell asleep amid the flowers. One night, waking suddenly, he heard voices. He opened his eyes and saw that the flowers had turned into beautiful girls. At first the prince thought it a dream, but then he realized it was happening in reality. The lovely girls danced an exquisitely graceful dance and sang a wondrous song in tender voices. The flower maidens were not afraid of the little man, on the contrary, they saw in him a protector and a brother. In their eyes he was not a dwarf but an ordinary young man. They joked with him, and soon the flowers and the prince became friends. Even by day, when the flowers returned to their usual forms, the prince could hear their voices and talk with them. One day, while walking through the valley, the little man saw from afar one remarkable flower. A snow-white rose of extraordinary beauty that seemed to light everything around it with its purity. The dwarf approached, and the rose appeared to blush at the sight of him, bowing its head aside. The dwarf stopped, not daring to come close. From behind the bushes he admired it at a distance. When night came, the young man still resolved to approach the splendid flower. When all the flowers of the valley turned into maidens, he saw among them the most extraordinary, most beautiful, most desired one. She was the white rose. The young man stood, as he had in the daytime among the beds, unable to take his eyes off her. He heard the merry voices of his floral sisters around him. "Look, look, he seems to be in love," giggled the daisies. "Hush," said the lilies to the daisies, "it's natural for the young." The white rose and the young man stood and looked at each other without turning away. 3 months passed. One warm summer day the florist said to the young man, "Tomorrow there will be a grand ball in the kingdom. By morning we must cut all our flowers with open buds. We will take them to the city. The wagon with the flowers must be ready before dawn. But if we cut the roses, won't they wither?" the young man asked with sadness in his eyes. "Cut flowers always wither, but nobles like to have their palaces adorned with flowers," the florist replied. The prince did not know what to say. In his palace there had been fresh flowers every morning. Now he understood they were thrown away in the evening to be replaced by fresh ones in the morning. He had never cared. The young man bowed his head and walked into the valley. "And besides, if we don't sell the flowers, you cannot regain your former appearance. What are we to do?" the florist called after him. But he did not hear her. His heart ached for the flowers and with despair. Entering the flower valley, he walked among the flowers, afraid to raise his head and look at their friendly faces. The flowers looked at him unsuspectingly, trying to reach out with their leaves and whispering, "What's wrong with him? What happened to him?" some asked. "We don't know," answered others. The little man silently went around all the beds and flower patches, and only at one flower did he not dare approach. Early the next morning the florist went out to check that everything was ready to send the flowers to the market. By her gate stood an empty wagon, and beside it a cheerful little man. "What does this mean, young man?" the florist cried. "You didn't cut the roses, and you haven't harnessed the horse to the wagon. We won't make it in time to deliver the flowers to the palace," she said, feigning anger. "I would rather remain a giant or a dwarf than cut the flowers," the prince answered with a firm, confident voice. The florist stepped down from the porch, took his hand, and led him into the garden full of fragrant living flowers. "You will not remain a giant, and you will not stay a dwarf. You have a kind heart. For that I want to give you the most beautiful flower from my garden," the florist said, brushing away a tear. She led him to the place where the prince's beloved rose grew. But waiting for the handsome youth there was not a flower but a beautiful fair-haired girl from a magical dream.